Welcome to my channel, a place where every mystery hides a story, and every story hides a truth. In the midst of forgotten streets, footsteps echo through the silence, and the faint glow of a lamp guards secrets that refuse to die. Every clue matters. A torn letter, a fading footprint, even the sound of a clock ticking in the dark. Here, doubt becomes a puzzle, and puzzles lead us to the heart of the unknown. So prepare your mind, watch closely, and listen carefully, because the shadows are speaking, and the truth is waiting to be found. This is where every case begins. Welcome to my channel. Asterisk.
Chapter 1. The Coffin in the Looking-Glass. It was in the waning days of March, during one of those grey London mornings when the damp mist coils like a cat around the ankles and lingers along the eaves of Baker Street, that a most singular case began, one which, even now, strains the boundary between logic and nightmare. I, John H. Watson, had only just returned from an early consultation in Paddington, and found my old friend, Sherlock Holmes, seated in his armchair by the hearth, his eyes closed, fingertips pressed together beneath his sharp chin. He might have been mistaken for a statue but for the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest and the twitch at the corner of his mouth that betrayed the workings of a mind already engaged in curious analyses. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the fog thickened. "Watson," said Holmes without opening his eyes, "you have had difficulty with the step outside the apothecary at number 32. I started. "Yes, but how on earth did you—" "You've scuffed the toe of your right boot, and there is a small patch of white dust on your cuff plaster. If I am not mistaken, the pharmacist there has been repairing his You hesitated upon the topmost step, as the stain on your trousers attests. You leaned against the railing, you see. The sleeve polish has dulled slightly, and only on one side." I chuckled, unable to help my admiration. "It's good to know some things in the world remain as certain as your deductions." Holmes opened his eyes then, the pale grey of them quickening with interest. "Then let us apply some of that certainty to a matter that arrived precisely 4.5 minutes ago." He gestured toward the side table, upon which lay a sealed envelope, bearing a black wax seal, imprinted with the head of a stag. I recognized the insignia at once. "Blackamoor Hall," I said. "That's the estate of Sir Leander Chillingham, is it not? North Riding of Yorkshire." "Correct. A rare client for us, indeed." "Read it." I opened the envelope and read aloud. "Mr. Holmes, an event of a most distressing and unnatural nature has occurred at Blackamoor Hall, but identical in make to those of our family. Vault was found not in the crypts, but within the looking-glass in the east wing gallery. Not a reflection, sir, but a solid construction, visible through the mirror's depth, as though hidden behind it. Yet there is no wall cavity. The servants are in uproar. My sister, Lady Elise, has collapsed. We beg your immediate assistance. Yours in urgency, Sir Leander Chillingham." I looked up. A coffin in the mirror, Holmes. Not reflected but appearing within it, as if the glass itself were but a window into another space. Holmes said, "Quite impossible, which makes it precisely our sort of affair." A knock at the door broke the moment. Mrs. Hudson poked her head in. "There's a carriage waiting outside, gentlemen. The driver says he's been paid to deliver you to King's Cross for the northbound express. Paid in advance." Holmes asked sharply, "Yes, sir, and a parcel for you as well." She passed Holmes a square cloth-wrapped box tied with rough twine. He opened it with his pen. Inside lay a smaller mirror, oval in shape, the glass aged and silvering at the edges, but clear enough to see one's face. Yet there was something strange. My own reflection stared back, but altered. I appeared thinner, older, my eyes hollow, my mouth downturned in sorrow. I felt my breath catch. Holmes examined it, expression unreadable. "A psychological trap," he murmured. "But meant for whom?" He rose abruptly. "Come, Watson, pack your revolver. I suspect the cold stones of Blackamoor Hall will offer no comfort, and perhaps even less safety. We are bound for the moors and into the heart of a most unnatural illusion." Thus began our journey to the North Riding, to a house whose walls had long whispered secrets and whose mirrors, it now seemed, had begun to speak in the voice of the dead. Chapter 2. The Fog of Blackamoor Hall. The countryside unfolded bleak and desolate beyond the rattling windows of our first-class carriage. The morning express bore us northward with mechanical precision, but Holmes was far from still. He stood much of the journey, gazing through the glass at fields drowned in mist, his fingers steepled before him in thought. I sat opposite, the letter from Sir Leander once again in my hands, though I had memorized every word. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" I asked. "An elaborate deception." "Undoubtedly," he said, "but of what nature, we cannot yet say. A coffin in a mirror, Watson, strangeness for its own sake, is rarely without purpose. It is not the supernatural that interests me, but the choice of symbol." He tapped the parcel beside him, the oval mirror that had arrived with the note. It was now wrapped again and stored carefully in his valise. "The mirror's false reflection," he continued, "may be an instrument, not merely an image. What does one see in a mirror but themselves, yet warped or selectively edited? And a coffin, that is a message, not a mistake." "But to whom?" I asked. He gave a brief smile. "Precisely." The landscape grew increasingly sparse as we approached the moorland regions. Blackamoor Hall was located near the village of Grimshop, an appropriately named cluster of stone dwellings hunched against the wind. At the small, near-deserted station, a liveried footman awaited us beside a dark green carriage. The man's eyes were downcast, his face pale as if he'd seen something too dreadful to share. "Dr. Watson and Mr. Holmes?" he asked in a hushed voice. Holmes inclined his head. "You are from Blackamoor Hall?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Giles, the butler, sent me. He said to tell you the mirror is still ... unchanged. Sir Leander is waiting." We climbed into the carriage, the wheels crunching on gravel as we moved through the grey-flecked countryside. Thick mist clung to the earth like shrouds, and I could just make out the outline of hills rising to our left, grim and hulking shapes that felt oddly oppressive. And then it came into view. Blackamoor Hall. The mansion loomed over the moor like a watchful guardian or a sentinel at a tomb. Built of dark stone, its towers and crenellations had weathered centuries of wind and rain. Ivy crept along its flanks like veins upon an ancient limb. A pair of iron gates opened before us with a long, drawn-out groan, and the carriage rattled through the courtyard toward the main entrance. We were met at the steps by Sir Leander Chillingham himself. He was a tall, stiff-shouldered man in his 50s, with silver hair swept back from a high brow and an expression that managed to convey both control and fatigue. His eyes, a pale blue, were shadowed with sleepless worry. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you are most welcome, though I wish it were under different circumstances." "We appreciate your swift arrangement," said Holmes, shaking the man's hand briefly. "I understand your family has suffered a rather spectral intrusion." Sir Leander did not flinch. "I'll take you there immediately. You may judge for yourselves." We followed him through the grand entry hall, past oil portraits and a gallery of mounted spears and swords. The house had a stillness about it too quiet, even for its size. Not a servant in sight, and the usual house sounds, clinking glass, footsteps, distant voices were conspicuously absent. "This way," Sir Leander said, leading us down a wide corridor toward the east wing. "The mirror in question hangs in the gallery. It has been in the family since the mid-18th century, carried here from our ancestral estate in Devon. My great-great-grandfather had it installed in the East Hall. There are stories, old tales of strange happenings, but never anything like this." "And when was the coffin discovered?" asked Holmes. "2 nights ago. Elise, my sister, was taking a walk through the gallery after supper. She claims she saw it first. Not a trick of the light, not a shadow. A full coffin, lying flat behind the mirror's surface. When I went to see it, I saw it too." He paused at a tall, oak-framed door, and looked at us both before unlocking it. "I warn you, what you are about to see is disquieting." He pushed open the door. The gallery beyond was narrow but long, its floor covered in a faded red carpet. Tapestries and portraits lined the walls. At the far end, an enormous mirror stood mounted between 2 marble columns on it, baroque, with curling silver filigree across its top. The glass itself was unbroken, flawless, but what lay within its depths was most disturbing. I drew closer, heart quickening. The mirror reflected the hallway behind us. Yes, but behind the reflection, within its depths, there lay a coffin. Not a reflection of one, not an illusion caused by angles or trick lighting, but the distinct image of a coffin laid flat, as if behind the glass pane, yet perfectly still and clear. The lid was closed, the wood dark and burnished. A brass nameplate gleamed faintly, though from this side we could not read its inscription. Holmes stared in silence. Then, with a swift step, he reached into his coat and produced a small magnifying lens, which he passed over the edge of the frame and the surface. No tarnish, no internal separation of glass layers. "The mirror is true, and yet the image is not reflected from this room. He rapped gently on the pane, solid, no hollow behind. Sir Leander stepped beside me, his voice a whisper. My sister fainted dead away. We've kept the room locked since. I don't know if it's madness, trickery or something worse. Holmes stood very still, then leaned forward and, with a fingertip, tapped gently on the pane once. The image of the coffin did not waver. It is not worse, he said finally, but it is deliberate. And Watson, whoever placed this image knew precisely what they were doing. He turned to Sir Leander. I shall require access to your vaults, your carpenter's records, and most importantly your list of guests over the past fortnight. Someone has turned a mirror into a message, Sir Leander. The question is, who sent it, and to whom? The mirror gave no answer. Only the coffin within seemed to wait. Chapter 3. Beneath the stone and glass. Holmes remained by the mirror longer than I thought necessary, examining every inch of the filigree with a jeweler's loupe, and passing his hands along the grain of the frame. He spoke little, save for a muttered remark about the wood being continental in origin, and a brief nod toward the unusually deep bevel of the glass. Meanwhile, Sir Leander had withdrawn to inform the housekeeper of our lodging needs, and I remained standing, uneasily transfixed by the strange presence beyond the glass. The coffin had not moved, nor wavered, nor changed in detail. It was as if the glass held a memory, suspended in permanent silence. Holmes finally stepped back. Watson, he said softly, observe not the thing itself, but what surrounds it. I glanced at the frame, the carpet beneath, the walls to either side. The mirror reflects what it should. Save for that, I said, gesturing toward the coffin, but it offers no view of anything behind it. It suggests a view into a false depth, not a reflection, but an insertion. Holmes smiled faintly. Precisely, not a trick of light, a trick of craft. He turned, coat swirling as he walked briskly from the gallery. Come, we must inspect the vaults, and I should very much like to meet the house carpenter. We found Sir Leander in the drawing-room, where a fire had been lit in a vain effort to dispel the gloom. The family crypt lies below the chapel, which is across the courtyard, he said. No one has entered the vaults in months, but if you insist, I do, Holmes replied. And the carpenter, Mr. Penn, I shall send for him. 10 minutes later, we were descending a narrow stair at the side of the chapel, oil lamps in hand. The air grew steadily colder. Damp stone walls bore traces of white fungus, and the air was heavy with age. At the bottom was a short corridor ending in a wrought iron gate. Sir Leander unlocked it, the hinge squealing in protest. Inside lay a vault of modest size, its walls fitted with arched recesses, some holding ancient caskets of wood and bronze. A plaque above each niche bore the names of generations past. Chillingham's from the reign of George II to the present century. Holmes moved silently among the dead. There, Sir Leander said, pointing. That one was for my sister. Empty, of course. Prepared years ago when her health was in question. But there has been no burial, no movement. Holmes crouched and examined the floor before the niche. Then he rose and inspected the walls behind. Finally, he stepped back, eyes narrowing. Dust undisturbed, stone uncut. This coffin, he said slowly, remains where it always was. Yet its image now rests behind a mirror upstairs. He turned to Sir Leander. May I ask about Lady Elisa's health? She is resting now, but delicate, yes. Her nerves have always been ... fragile. She suffered a terrible bout of influenza last winter, and has never truly recovered. Her mind is clear, I assure you, but she startles easily. I see, Holmes said thoughtfully. We shall speak with her soon, but for now, I wish to inspect your workshop. Back through the winding halls of Blackymore Hall we went, until we came to a door near the servants' quarters. There we met Mr. Penrose, a balding, sun-wrinkled man in his 60s, with a carpenter's belt cinched tightly around his faded waistcoat. The gallery mirror, he said, when Holmes posed his first question. Never touched it, sir. Never even dusted the thing. Too delicate. The silvering's so old it might crack with a whisper. Has any work been done in that room in the past month? Holmes asked. Penrose frowned, tugging at his collar. No, sir. I was working on a table leg for Lady Elisa's sitting room. That's all. Not a board changed upstairs. Holmes eyed him carefully. And no one else has access to your tools. No hired workers. Not since the floods last spring. And I keep the key to the tool chest on me at all times. Holmes nodded slowly. "Might I examine your saws and chisels, Mr. Penrose?" The carpenter looked puzzled, but obliged. Holmes passed his fingers along the edge of each tool, examining them for traces of unusual use. On a small chisel, he paused, lifting it to the light. A peculiar residue, varnish of some kind, and paint, black. He met Penrose's eyes. "Did you lend this to anyone?" "Not that I can recall." "I don't lend tools, sir." Holmes said nothing more, but pocketed a flake of the substance in a wax envelope and returned the chisel to its place. Then, as though satisfied for the moment, he turned and made for the upper halls once more. As we ascended the stairs, I fell into step beside him. "You suspect the mirror has been altered?" "I am certain of it." "But how? The glass is solid. There's no hollow behind it. And yet, the coffin is no ghost, Watson, nor prophecy. It is a design." He stopped before the gallery door and turned to me, his voice low. "Someone has engineered this scene. The question is, to frighten whom? And why?" At that moment, a voice echoed from the far end of the corridor. "Mr. Holmes." It was the housekeeper, her hands clasped anxiously. "My lady is awake. She will see you now." Holmes gave a slight bow. "Then let us proceed." As we followed her toward Lady Elisa's rooms, the chill of the vault still in our bones, I could not help but glance once more at the mirror's door. Behind that silent glass, a coffin still waited. But now, I was no longer sure it waited for the dead Dot. It waited for someone still living. Chapter 4. The Pale Lady of the East Wing Lady. Elise Chillingham received us from a backed chair positioned before the window of her sitting room. The curtains were half drawn. The grey daylight diffused across the pale lavender wallpaper and silken drapery. She was wrapped in a shawl of heathered wool, though her posture was not frail. There was a tension in her shoulders, and in her long, delicate fingers, white as bone, that tugged at the edge of her sleeve. She was not young, but neither was she old. A woman of perhaps 45, with sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of steel, and lips that trembled despite her silence. Her hair, raven dark, had begun to silver at the temples. There was beauty there, yes, but the beauty of something etched by grief. Holmes bowed politely. "Lady Elise, I appreciate your time." She inclined her head. "My brother tells me you came quickly." "As quickly as steam and rails would allow," Holmes replied. "We have seen the mirror." Her hands twitched slightly, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then you believe me?" Holmes offered no answer, only his patient gaze. "I thought it was a trick of exhaustion," she continued. "I have had a fever of the nerves before, but this was not like those other spells. This was real." She leaned forward, eyes fixed on Holmes. I saw it inside the glass. Not a reflection, not something outside. It was within. "A coffin," Holmes said softly. She nodded, voice brittle. "Polished mahogany, brass handles, a plaque on the lid. But the name," she faltered. "I could not make it out. It was as though the name had not yet been written, or was waiting to be read." A long silence passed. "Did you feel watched?" Holmes asked quietly. Lady Elise hesitated. "Yes, and not just then. For several weeks now, I sometimes hear footsteps in the corridor outside when none are there. My personal mirror cracked last Monday, and I've found my door ajar in the morning when I distinctly recall shutting it tight. Has anything else vanished or appeared unexpectedly?" She glanced toward a side table. "A locket. It vanished 2 nights ago. It held a miniature of our mother. I'd worn it every evening since the autumn. Now it's gone." Holmes nodded gravely, pacing the room slowly, taking in the surroundings, the bookshelf, the wardrobe, the dressing table. "Has anyone had access to your rooms beyond the staff?" "No. I receive few visitors, and since the mirror was found, the staff have become evasive, frightened. One of the maids refused to enter the East Wing altogether." "May I inspect your wardrobe?" She gestured faintly. "Of course." Holmes opened the armoire with his usual delicacy, sifting through coats, gloves, and boxes. One velvet-lined drawer was half open. He drew it forward and produced a silver-backed hand mirror. Cracked in the upper right corner, he held it to the light, then turned it toward Lady Elise. "May I ask what you saw in this mirror, just before the crack appeared?" She hesitated. "My face, but not quite my own hollow-eyed cold. It was as if the glass reflected what I would become, not what I was." "Not a hallucination," Holmes murmured, "but a suggestion. Mirrors are ideal tools for manipulation." I stepped forward. "Do you mean hypnosis?" "No, something subtler. Someone is designing not only the image, but the mind around it. It is a campaign of pressure. Lady Elise looked between us. But why? That, my lady, is what I hope to determine. Holmes examined the hinges of the wardrobe and the space behind it, then turned to the fireplace. Above it hung a landscape in oils, an ancient depiction of Blackamoor Hall under a storm-choked sky. Tell me, Holmes said suddenly, who in this house bears you ill will? The question startled her. She blinked. No one, openly, perhaps, but is there a rivalry, a disagreement, some long-unspoken bitterness? Her lips parted, then closed again. There is my cousin Benedict. He has long believed the estate would come to him, but our father named Leander heir years ago. Benedict lives in a cottage on the edge of the property. He has never said anything improper, but he keeps his distance. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A man displaced by a younger branch of the family. And does he visit only at Christmastide? He and Leander are polite, but strained. And what of servants? Has any departed recently, or requested unusual leave? One, she said. Ellen Beach, a scullery maid. She was dismissed 2 weeks ago. For what reason? Stealing linens. But I never believed she was guilty. She insisted she was being framed. Holmes's brows lifted a fraction. And who reported her? Lady Elise looked troubled. The housekeeper, Mrs. Greaves. Holmes turned to me. Watson, do make a note, Miss Ellen Beach. We must speak with her if she can be found. Then, stepping away from the hearth, Holmes bowed again. Lady Elise, I thank you. One final question. Did your father, in life, ever speak of the mirror in the east wing? A shadow passed over her face. He told us never to move it, that it had once belonged to a branch of the family that no longer speaks our name. He called it a reminder, but he would never explain of what. Holmes said nothing more. We left her with a nod, the heavy silence of her chambers closing behind us. As we stepped into the corridor, I asked, do you believe her? Watson, Holmes said, his voice quiet but firm. She is not mad, but someone is making her seem so, not to us, perhaps, but to herself. A woman isolated, burdened with ancestral pressure, a symbol of death appearing in a mirror she did not summon. He paused. I believe we are dealing not merely with a mystery of objects, but with a deliberate erosion of sanity. Then this is not a warning, I said slowly. It's a threat. Holmes nodded once. And if so, he murmured, the threat has already entered the house. Chapter 5. The man at the edge of the moor. The following morning dawned with a sour, colorless light. The fog, having thinned slightly overnight, now returned with renewed purpose, coiling about Blackamoor Hall's turrets and chimneys like a living thing. Holmes and I took a modest breakfast in a quiet parlour near the servants' passage. Sir Leander had left word that he would be out inspecting tenant records, and Lady Elise had not yet stirred. The great house seemed subdued, each creaking floorboard echoing as though hesitant to disturb the oppressive quiet. Holmes toyed with a slice of bread for several minutes, before speaking. Watson, you recall Lady Elise's mention of her cousin Benedict. Indeed, she seemed unsure of him but not hostile, which, in itself, is worth noting. That which is quietly tolerated is often more dangerous than open dislike. He reached for his coat. Today, we walk. I would very much like to see the land where this cousin resides, and perhaps the man himself. The fog parted reluctantly as we passed through the iron gates of Blackamoor and struck out along the eastern track. The moorland opened before us in flat, desolate patches, interrupted only by the occasional hedgerow or twisted hawthorn. The soil was dark with moisture, and our boots left deep impressions. I don't much like this country, I said aloud after a while. There's something oppressive in the way it presses against the sky. Holmes gave a faint smile. Topography, Watson, can influence the nerves, as can isolation, which is precisely why I find it curious that someone would choose to dwell alone out here by preference. We followed the track for nearly a mile, before a modest structure emerged from the Meester stone cottage with a moss-ridden roof and a bent chimney that clung to the edge of the moor like a forgotten tooth. A black dog barked as we approached, its hackles rising. Holmes paused, then offered a low whistle. A moment later, the cottage door opened and a man stepped into view. Benedict Chillingham was tall and spare, with sunken cheeks and sharp grey eyes. He wore a thick wool coat patched at the elbows and trousers, still damp with morning dew. His expression bore the cool restraint of a man accustomed to suspicion. "You've come from Blackamoor," he said before we had even spoken. "You carry the scent of dust and stone." "I am Sherlock Holmes," my companion replied, unbothered by the poetic tone. "And this is my friend, Dr. Watson. We are investigating a matter on behalf of your cousin Leander." Benedict stepped aside. "Then you had best come in. The moor is not kind to lingering men." Inside, the cottage was sparse but orderly, books stacked in high columns, a writing desk cluttered with ink bottles and folded maps, and above the hearth, a curious object, a small wooden box inlaid with what appeared to be tiny fragments of mirror. Holmes, of course, took it in at once. "You collect mirrors?" "Only fragments," Benedict said coolly. "Broken ones. I find them more honest." Watson and I exchanged a glance, but Holmes pressed on. "You're aware, I presume, of the event that has shaken Blackamoor Hall. I assume you refer to the coffin in the gallery mirror." Benedict moved to the hearth and stirred the embers absently. "I've heard enough to know madness when it approaches. You do not believe it was real." "I believe it was perceived, but that does not mean it was." Holmes stepped closer, examining the box above the hearth. "You've not been to Blackamoor in some weeks?" "No," Benedict replied. "Not since Christmas. I wasn't invited to the New Year's supper, and I took the hint. There is tension between yourself and Sir Leander." "Not tension," he replied. "Merely clarity. My father was the elder brother. The estate should have passed through our line, but Leander was more palatable to the old man. He played the dutiful son while I chose to live honestly." Holmes nodded, absorbing every word. "And Lady Elise?" Benedict's face softened slightly. "She is blameless and fragile. That house weighs upon her. I've always said so." "You've heard nothing of a missing locket, or a dismissed servant?" "Nothing." Holmes turned to face him fully. "Would you permit us to search your grounds?" Benedict gave a quiet laugh. "If you believe I've stolen a ghost and hidden it among the nettles, you're welcome to look." And so we did. Holmes examined the tool shed, the root cellar, and even the low stone wall that bordered the rear of the property. Nothing was disturbed, nothing hidden. It was only as we prepared to leave that Holmes paused by the writing desk once more. He ran a finger along one of the maps. "You are fond of old cartography?" "Yes," Benedict said. "That's the original layout of Blackamoor Hall from the late 1700s. I keep it as a curiosity." Holmes studied the parchment closely. "There," he said, pointing, "a chamber marked Sol Speculum." Benedict shrugged. "An old Latin label, the only mirror. Probably the same mirror that now hangs in the gallery." Holmes stared at the words a moment longer. Then, without a word, he turned and stepped toward the door. "Thank you, Mr. Chillingham. I suspect we may return before long." Benedict watched us leave without further remark. The black dog barked again as we crossed the stile and made our way back onto the moor. I caught up to Holmes. "What did you find?" He tapped the side of his head. "Nothing. And that, Watson, is the problem. Benedict Chillingham is intelligent, insightful, and perfectly poised. Too poised. His indifference is almost rehearsed. You suspect him?" "I suspect he knows more than he dares admit, and I suspect that whatever hangs behind the glass at Blackamoor Hall is not meant for Elise alone." We passed into the mist again, and behind us, the cottage vanished though it had never been there at all. Chapter 6. The Hidden. Inconsistency. We returned to Blackamoor Hall in the late afternoon, our boots caked with more mud and our coats sodden with mist. The fog had thickened once again, clinging to the windows like a veil of breath held too long. As we crossed the threshold of the great house, I sensed a weight in the air, a hush that felt expectant, as though the house itself were holding its secrets tightly clenched. Holmes paused in the vestibule, eyes half-lidded, sniffing the air. Someone has lit cedarwood in the drawing-room, a rare scent for an anxious household. We found Sir Leander standing by the fireplace, a glass of brandy in hand, the logs hissing quietly behind him. He turned as we entered. "You've seen Benedict?" he asked. Holmes nodded. "We have. A curious man, honest in voice, but not in manner. Benedict has always been solitary," Sir Leander said carefully. "He believes himself wronged, but makes no move to right it. Sometimes the worst lies are the ones people tell themselves." Holmes murmured, "I wonder if his bitterness has remained purely rhetorical." Sir Leander did not answer. I also examined the family plans. Holmes continued. "I noted an unusual chamber listed on a map in Benedict's possession, Sol Speculum, or the only mirror. Would you know anything of it?" Sir Leander's brow furrowed. "The name is familiar. My father spoke of it once. He claimed the East Wing mirror was brought from an earlier house, part of a collection destroyed during a fire in Devon. That one mirror survived. It was said to show not only the reflection, but the heart. Superstition, of course. Superstition can be a very effective tool, Holmes replied. Have you found anything new? Leander asked, swirling the brandy absently. Only the absence of something expected, Holmes said. A most dangerous kind of clue. With that cryptic remark, Holmes turned and left the room, motioning for me to follow. We ascended the stairs once more, this time turning not toward the gallery, but toward the servants' wing. I've been thinking, Watson, he said as we walked, about the sequence of events, the appearance of the coffin, the cracked mirror, the dismissed maid, the missing locket, and Lady Elisa's decline. They do not form a straight line, but they do form a circle. Someone wants to isolate her, to undermine her mind. That requires careful, intimate knowledge. And yet Benedict lives apart. The staff are nervous, and the family keeps secrets even from each other. We arrived at the housekeeper's office. Mrs. Greaves, a stern woman in black bombazine, rose from her desk with visible reluctance. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I was not expecting you. No doubt, Holmes said with a polite smile, but I must speak with you about Ellen Beach. She stiffened. The girl was trouble from the beginning, always late, always peering into places she didn't belong. When the silver napkins vanished, I had no doubt, yet Lady Elise believed her innocent. I added. Mrs. Greaves sniffed. Her ladyship is too gentle. Ellen had a mouth on her, said there were whispers in the house, said someone was playing tricks with the mirrors. Well, perhaps someone was, but it wasn't my business to feed that foolishness. Holmes tilted his head. Whispers, you say? She claimed she heard them coming from behind the walls. That was the final straw. I dismissed her before she upset the other maids. Holmes regarded her a long moment. And did she ever go near the gallery? Only once, Mrs. Greaves said with visible discomfort. The day before she was sent off, I found her standing before the mirror, just staring. She didn't notice me at first. Then she turned and asked if I'd ever seen my own reflection lie to me. There was silence. I sent her to pack that very afternoon. Do you have her address? Holmes asked. I did, but she never left it. The coachman said she never arrived in Grimshaw, never collected her wages. It's as though she vanished. Holmes said nothing, but his eyes sharpened. Thank you, he said quietly. That will be all. As we returned to the corridor, Holmes murmured, Watson, something is wrong. Not in the overt sense, but in the timing. The mirror was revealed to Lady Elise 2 nights ago. Ellen Beach disappeared before that. Yet she spoke of strange things behind mirrors, meaning the strangeness began earlier than the family admits. You suspect she saw the coffin before Lady Elise, or something else, something she was not meant to see. We paused near the base of the stairs. Holmes tapped the banister with a distant look. Watson, I want you to go to the village. Speak to the Grimshaw coachman. Find out precisely where Ellen Beach was left. If she vanished between here and there, someone must have seen her. Meanwhile, I will return to the gallery. There is something about that mirror I have yet to test. Be cautious, I warned. If someone is manipulating Lady Elise, they may know you're drawing close. Holmes gave a tight smile. Let them know. The tighter the noose, the more desperate the hand. And desperation, my dear Watson, reveals far more than cleverness. As I set out toward the village, I could not shake the feeling that some quiet mechanism had begun to turn within Blackamoor Halslow. Unseen gears, shifting toward an end we had not yet glimpsed, and in the gallery above, behind the silvered glass, a coffin continued to wait, silent, patient, unmoving. Chapter 7, Vanishing Point Grim. Shope lay just over 2 miles from Blackamoor Hall, but it felt farther still, separated by more than distance, where Blackamoor crouched in lonely silence upon its moorland hill. The village held the illusion of comfort. Modest stone homes, a square with an iron pump, and a chapel whose bell had not rung in years. As I made my way down the main road, passing a shop or two shuttered against the mist, I wondered how often the affairs of Blackamoor reached these streets, and how often they were ignored. The coaching inn, the Wayfarer's Rest, stood near the green. It was a low, timber-beamed structure with smoke curling listlessly from its chimney, and a crooked sign hanging above the door. Inside, the hearth was unlit, the air stale with the scent of ale and damp wool. A single man sat at a corner table nursing a tankard. Behind the bar, a thick-set man of 60, with wind-reddened cheeks and a greying beard, eyed me with professional disinterest. Dr. Watson, I introduced myself. I'm looking for the man who drove Miss Ellen Beach from Blackamoor Hall about 2 weeks past. The landlord wiped his hands on a cloth. That'd be Thomas Clegg. He's out back mending the axle on his trap. I found Clegg squatting beside a weather-beaten cart, hands black with grease. He looked up as I approached, squinting through wire-rimmed spectacles. "You, the doctor?" Then he asked. "Mr. Holmes's man?" "I am. He took a passenger from Blackamoor Hollow, young maid, Ellen Beach. I need to know where you left her." He wiped his hands slowly, then leaned back on his heels. I, quiet little thing, didn't say more'n 10 words, sat staring out the window all the way down the hill. "And where did you drop her?" "At the far end of Mill Lane. She asked to be let off there." I thought it odd. No lodgings, there only the old tannery and the chapel graveyard. She said nothing else. He scratched his beard. "Only that she had to fetch something left behind. Wouldn't say what." A prickling sensation passed through me. "Did she seem frightened?" Clegg nodded. "More like dazed. Eyes all hollow, like she'd seen something she wasn't meant to. And no one saw her after that." He shook his head. "I went by the same road later that evening. Fog was thick. Didn't see a soul. But I do recall ... He paused, frowning. "I saw lantern light in the chapel yard, moving. I figured it was the groundsman, but when I waved it vanished." I stiffened. "You're certain?" "Positive. I'm not one for stories, doctor, but something was wrong that night." I thanked him and left, following the road toward Mill Lane. It was little more than a dirt path at the edge of the village, bordered by a collapsing fence and scattered tufts of nettle. The old tannery loomed beyond a crumbling shell of brick with a half-fallen roof. The chapel stood farther back, half swallowed by the trees, its windows black and its door chained shut. I stepped over the low gate and into the graveyard, even in daylight. The place was somber. Stone angels slouched with broken wings. Lichen traced illegible names across the tombs. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, a bird called once, then fell silent. I moved slowly among the graves, noting the most recent headstones, none bearing Ellen Beach's name. I searched for disturbed earth, for the sign of a shallow burial hastily made, but found none. And then I saw a dot near the base of the chapel wall. Beneath a jutting eave, a dark smear stained the stone. As I approached, I knelt and touched it. Wax, candle wax, melted and hardened again. I looked up. Above the wax, barely visible against the stone, was a mark, an old symbol, etched crudely, a vertical line crossed by a circle. Not a religious sign, but something older, unfamiliar. I stood quickly and turned downly to freeze. There, among the graves, was a woman. She stood still as frost, her hair pinned tightly, her dress dark and plain. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, and in her hand was a small object that glinted, a locket. "Miss Beach?" I asked cautiously. The woman turned without answering and stepped backward into the fog. I followed, but she vanished behind the chapel. When I rounded the corner, there was nothing, no sound, no footprint, only the deep silence of old stones and the weight of unseen eyes. I returned to Blackamoor Hall just past sundown. Holmes was waiting in the vestibule, his coat still damp with fog and a smear of dust upon his right cuff. "Well," he asked. "I found the coachman. He left her near the chapel. She never returned. I saw candle wax old symbols, and Holmes' I saw her, or someone I took to be her, holding the missing locket. She vanished in the mist." Holmes said nothing for a long moment. "I too found something," he said at last. "Come." He led me to the gallery. The great mirror stood in its place, unchanged, its glass clear, the coffin still visible within, but Holmes motioned to the floor. "Here." I knelt. Just at the foot of the mirror, concealed by the length of a tapestry, was a gap in the floorboard, then no wider than a matchbox. Holmes produced a thin blade and levered it gently upward. The board lifted. Beneath was a hollow, just large enough to contain a narrow silver disc, no bigger than a saucer. Holmes held it up. "An optical disc," he said. "Painted glass, layered with mirror backing. A clever illusion when placed at a certain angle. I believe it magnifies and projects the image of a small model likely hidden within the frame itself. So it's mechanical." I breathed. "In part," Holmes said, "but someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to blend science with superstition. They didn't simply want Lady Elise to see a coffin, they wanted her to believe in it. And that, Watson, is far more dangerous than any ghost." He turned back toward the mirror, eyes narrowing. "But now we must ask, who placed this device? When, and most of all, what else have they hidden in this house?" Chapter 8. Reflections that do not echo. The following day dawned without sun. Only a bleached and colorless sky filtered through drizzling rain. I woke with the scent of damp stone heavy in my nostrils and the cold memory of the chapel graveyard still clinging to my thoughts. Holmes, as ever, had been awake before me. When I emerged into the corridor, I found him seated in a narrow side room lined with bookshelves, poring over architectural drawings spread across the table. He looked up as I entered Blackamoor Hall. He said, "Tapping one of the diagrams has not always been as it appears now. These plans, dated 1811, reveal a curious structural fact. This corridor," he traced a passage that ran parallel to the East Gallery, "was once a narrow service passage, bricked up sometime after 1845, and you believe it is still accessible. I believe it was used recently. Someone would need private access to the gallery wall without entering it openly. A bricked corridor, if cleverly concealed, would serve that purpose admirably." He rolled up the plans and stood, fastening his coat. "We must inspect the east wing from the exterior. The stonework may tell us what the eyes cannot." We crossed through the drawing room and into the front courtyard, stepping out into the wet wind-brushed air. Blackamoor loomed above, somber as a tomb, its high gables streaked with moss. Holmes led us around the side of the house, through a tangle of hedges, and past a dilapidated greenhouse, now overtaken by vines. The ground sloped upward slightly, revealing the east wing wall, its surface veiled in ivy and streaked with age. Holmes stepped close, pressing a gloved hand to the stone, inspecting the wall inch by inch. He paused near a buttress, then stepped back, eyes gleaming. "Note the color variation, Watson. These stones darker here, lighter above. The mortar is newer than the surrounding frame, bricked from within, but not older than 10 years, meaning it could have been opened again." "Indeed, and someone has." Holmes knelt, drawing a small magnifying lens from his pocket, and examining the base of the wall. He pointed to a series of fine scratches in the stone, barely visible beneath the mud, tool marks thin-bladed. This area was disturbed recently. He stood, brushing the rain from his shoulders. "The corridor remains sealed on the outside, but within, I believe it has been accessed. Let us return inside." We navigated the narrow rear staircase and passed into the east wing. As we reached the gallery door, Holmes paused, then turned instead to a smaller linen cupboard across the hall. "An innocuous location," he said, "but perfectly aligned with the bricked corridor." He opened the door and removed the shelves with quiet efficiency. Behind the back panel of the cupboard, a faint seam ran vertically, an outline of a door concealed beneath wood paneling. Holmes ran his hand along the edge. A subtle catch clicked beneath his fingers, and the panel gave way with a soft groan. The hidden passage yawned open, dark and cold as a grave. I followed him into the passage, the scent of mildew rising around us. Our lanterns flickered against the damp stone, revealing walls long untouched by sunlight. The corridor was narrow, just wide enough for one man to pass, and curved gently toward the gallery. We moved carefully, the sound of our footsteps muffled. After a dozen paces, Holmes raised his hand. "Stop!" Ahead, a faint glimmer. A small aperture had been cut into the wall, a spy hole, perfectly positioned to view the gallery mirror. A narrow shelf lay beneath it, dust disturbed, as if something had been placed and recently removed. Holmes examined the shelf, then the crevice itself. This is where they operated the projectioner, just in the lens, maintaining the illusion. Whoever used this did so often, and with care. And the image of the coffin, a miniature placed behind a magnifying filter artfully angled. It was removed, likely after we discovered the floorboard hollow. I felt a chill pass over me. So the mirror never lied, it was made to lie. Precisely. We continued down the passage and discovered a second exit, concealed behind a tapestry in a forgotten anteroom off the eastern stairs. Holmes opened the door slowly, then let it click shut behind us. "Watson, we must speak to Lady Elise again. Whoever constructed this illusion did so not to frighten her in passing, but to unravel her gradually." We found her in the conservatory, seated among the withering orchids. Her complexion was pale, but her bearing composed. "I had a dream," she said before we had even spoken. "I saw my own face inside the coffin. It smiled at me, and I could not look away." Holmes bowed. "Lady Elise, may I ask, have you ever entered the gallery from any entrance other than the main corridor?" She blinked. "No. I didn't know there was another. And do you recall any of the staff showing particular interest in the gallery of late?" She hesitated. "There was one man, the footman, Jeremy. He was quiet, attentive, perhaps too much so. He used to ask questions about the house's past, about my dreams. Holmes's eyes sharpened. And where is he now? I've not seen him in over a week. We exchanged a look. Holmes turned to me. Watson, summon Sir Leander. We must search the servants' quarters. I believe we are closer than ever. As I departed, Lady Elisa's voice followed me. It's strange, she said softly. Sometimes I wonder if the mirror showed me the future, or if it merely wanted me to think so. Behind her, the orchids hung their heads, as if grieving something that had not yet occurred. Chapter 9. The disappearance of Jeremy. Sir Leander met us in the vestibule with visible irritation, though beneath it I detected a flicker of unease. Jeremy, he repeated. Yes, one of the junior footmen, reliable, if unremarkable, though I confess I hadn't noticed his absence. Holmes gave a tight nod. Lady Elise recalls him asking questions, strange ones, about her dreams, about the house. Sir Leander's brow furrowed. He's no longer here, then? No one seems to have seen him in over a week, I interjected, and for a man of such position, that absence should not have passed unnoticed. Leander motioned toward the corridor. Come, we'll check his quarters. The servants' hall lay behind the main kitchen's a maze of narrow passageways and plain wooden doors, each marked by a small brass plate. Jeremy's room was at the far end, near the rear stairwell. Sir Leander produced a key and opened the door. The room was small and spart a narrow bed, single dresser, trunk at the foot, but even at first glance, Holmes's eyes narrowed. No dust on the floorboards near the threshold, yet the window remains latched from the inside. Someone has returned here recently, and done so with caution. He stepped inside, immediately gravitating toward the writing desk beneath the small, slanted window. The surface was clean, too clean. Holmes opened the top drawer and ran his hand along the interior lining. Watson, he murmured, note the faint indentations here, parchment written upon, then removed. Sir Leander leaned over my shoulder. Could he have fled? Holmes did not answer. He turned his attention to the trunk at the foot of the bed, kneeling and inspecting the lock. Unforced, he muttered, opening it slowly. Inside, a modest collection of folded garments, a pair of worn boots, and a cloth-wrapped bundle. Holmes unwrapped it delicately, to reveal a stack of notes, a small mirror cracked hand, a folded map of Blackamoor Hall. My breath caught as I saw what had been drawn over the plan in black ink. A series of circles, all centered on the east wing. Holmes examined the notes, scanning each with increasing speed, his expression darkening. These are observations, he said grimly. Jeremy was watching Lady Elise, recording her movements, her moods, even her dreams. Look here, March 3rd, spoke of footsteps in corridor. Eyes red, said she felt watched through glass. And here, I added, pointing, March 5th, awoke to find locket gone. Did not mention it. Waited until after breakfast before noticing. Influence growing stronger. Sir Leander stared at us both, his jaw tightening. This is madness. Why would he do this? Holmes said nothing. He pulled the mirror from the cloth small handheld, and precisely like the one Lady Elise had described cracking earlier, it's been cut to match the dimensions of a projection lens. Holmes murmured, and the crack, see how it runs diagonally across the reflective center. I believe this mirror was used as a focusing device, not merely for observation. He placed the mirror aside and studied the remaining papers. One bore only a name, repeated again and again in small, deliberate handwriting. Sol speculum, sol speculum, sol speculum, Latin for the only mirror, I said quietly. The same phrase from the map in Benedict's cottage. Holmes rose, turning toward Sir Leander. We must find Jeremy. He is either a victim or the architect. Sir Leander hesitated. There is a shed by the west orchard. Tools, fencing materials. He may have gone there. Holmes's eyes flicked toward me. Bring your revolver, Watson. The orchard was half-dead twisted apple trees, shedding blackened blossoms, their roots half drowned in the soggy soil. The shed lay just beyond the low stone wall, its door slightly ajar, creaking faintly in the breeze. We approached in silence. Holmes raised a hand for caution. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the space was dim and sour with mildew. Tools hung from rusting hooks. A pair of lanterns rested atop a barrel, and in the corner, curled in a threadbare blanket, lay a figure. Jeremy. He stirred as Holmes stepped inside, blinking blearily. His face was pale, cheeks sunken, hair damp with sweat. When he saw us, he tried to sit up, then slumped back against the wall. You shouldn't have found me, he rasped. Holmes knelt beside him. You've been hiding. Not hiding, he whispered. Waiting. I had to leave before I finished it. What were you finishing? Jeremy. He shook his head violently. It wasn't mine. I swear it. The idea it came from the mirror. I thought I was just watching, but then I saw what? Jeremy stared straight ahead, as if through Holmes, his pupils dilated with something like terror. The coffin, but not in the mirror. Behind me, in every reflection, Holmes pressed a hand gently to the young man's wrist. You've not eaten in days. I couldn't. Every time I looked down, the silver spoons showed my own body lying cold in pine. I crouched beside Holmes. This man is delusional. Holmes shook his head. No, Watson, he suggested, driven there by design. Someone used him, fed him fragments, drew him into their illusion. Jeremy's breathing grew shallow. I tried to stop. I hid the lens, but the light it still came through, from the cracks, even with the door shut. He looked up at Holmes, eyes wet. Do you believe in a thing that remembers itself into existence? Holmes met his gaze with perfect stillness. No, he said, but I believe someone wanted you to believe that, and they nearly succeeded. Jeremy passed out then, the tension leaving his body in a sigh. Holmes stood. He will recover, he said. But his mind was a battlefield, and someone's game was to make him the first casualty. I looked around the shed once more. Do you think it's over? Holmes's face was grim. No, Watson. The illusion was never meant to stop with Jeremy. It was meant to begin with Lady Elisande, end with the coffin becoming real. He looked toward the looming hall beyond the orchard, and now we know it. The killer's method is not poison or blade. It is belief crafted, sharpened, and aimed straight at the mind. He turned to me, which means we must now ask the most dangerous question of all. I frowned. What question? Holmes's voice was quiet, but cold as flint. Who gains most if Lady Elise loses everything? Chapter 10. The inheritance clause. We returned to Blackamoor Hall, under a veil of thickening rain, the orchard leaves clattering like bone against bone in the wind. Jeremy had been left in the care of the village physician, his mind fragmented, but his body intact. Yet Holmes' silence on the walk back spoke volumes. His thoughts, like the path beneath our feet, were winding, treacherous, and leading somewhere dark. Inside the vestibule, Sir Leander awaited us with a furrowed brow. Well, he asked, was he found? Holmes gave a curt nod. Alive, though barely, in a state of nervous collapse brought on by deliberate psychological manipulation. Sir Leander's jaw clenched. So he was the cause of it all? No, Holmes said flatly. He was the instrument, a pawn pushed into place. At that, Sir Leander's face turned a shade paler. Then who's the player? That, Holmes said, we are close to uncovering. He gestured toward the drawing room. But first, I should like to examine your late father's legal affairs, particularly his will. My father's will. Leander blinked. Why? Because, Sir Leander, this house, its legacy, and the mirror's symbolism all seem tied to loss. Someone intends to orchestrate a collapse, not just of mind, but of lineage. There was a pause. Then Sir Leander nodded slowly. I will fetch the documents. He returned shortly with a locked brass casket, which he placed on the table. A key from his pocket turned the lock with a sharp click. Within lay a small bundle of legal papers, a notary's seal, and a folded letter. Holmes examined the topmost documents, the last will and testament of Lord Richard Chillingham, dated 11 years prior. I stood beside him as he read. To Leander, the house, lands, and estate. To Elise, the income and west wing. To Benedict Chillingham, the sum of £500 and perpetual residence at the family cottage. Holmes murmured, fair, if somewhat dismissive of Benedict's claims, but then he drew out a second sheet thinner, handwritten, appended in the corner with a lawyer's signature, a codicil. Holmes said softly. It read, in the event of Elise Chillingham's untimely death or permanent institutional confinement, her portion of the estate shall revert to the senior bloodline, namely Benedict Chillingham and his lawful heirs. I felt my breath catch. Holmes turned the paper slowly. A cruel legal clause, he said, but not uncommon among older families, designed to prevent estate fragmentation. Sir Leander's face was unreadable. You think Benedict would? I think Benedict knows of it. And I think someone close to this house knew as well, perhaps. Someone who had reason to believe Lady Elise was already unstable. I frowned. But we've seen no evidence that Benedict was directly involved. The optical device, the notes, those were Jeremy's hands. Exactly, Holmes said. But Jeremy was guided, fed imagery, fed fear. Someone planted the idea of the mirror's prophecy and let it grow. Holmes turned suddenly to Sir Leander. Tell me, has your sister had any other episodes in the past? Any time where she was thought unwell? Sir Leander shifted. Years ago, briefly, after our mother died, she collapsed for several weeks, sleepwalked, cried out in her dreams, but she recovered. Yet those memories would have left a mark, Holmes said. A vulnerability, one someone could exploit. He began pacing. The locket was stolen to disorient her, the mirror illusion created to terrify, the dreams induced, the objects manipulated, a patient strategy, one designed not to kill Elise outright, but to unmoor her sanity, to discredit her, to make institutionalization seem inevitable. And once confined, I said, her inheritance would revert to Benedict, or someone who could claim to act on his behalf. Holmes added, we must determine who had both motive and proximity, someone who knew the mirror's history, someone who could orchestrate access to the gallery without suspicion. Benedict, I suggested. Holmes shook his head. Too visible. He is a natural suspect. Know someone else? He turned to Sir Leander. I must examine the household ledgers, specifically those covering the last 3 months, supplies, maintenance, staff wages, and most importantly visitors. An hour later, we sat in the estate's library, a set of large, leather-bound books spread before us. Holmes's fingers danced across the pages with remarkable speed, eyes flicking from entry to entry. There, he said at last, a supply requisition dated February 27th, charged under miscellaneous repairs. Line item, custom lens fit-in invoice from Grimshope Optical Shop. He flipped another page, and here March 3rd, payment made to H. Walker, itinerant tradesman. Who is this? Sir Leander rubbed his chin. I don't recall the name. Perhaps a traveling carpenter. Holmes closed the ledger. That's the alias. But I believe Walker never left. I believe he stayed under another name, perhaps on the grounds, or within the village, and continued his work, entering the house only when the hall was quiet. Sir Leander stood. You believe this man, Walker, built the mechanism? Holmes nodded. Yes, and planted the idea in Jeremy's mind. Jeremy's notes mirror Lady Elisa's fears too closely. The phrasing is too similar. At that moment, a knock came at the library door. It was the butler, Giles, looking uneasy. A letter, sir, he said. Left at the gate. Holmes took the envelope. It was unmarked, sealed with a rough smear of black wax. He broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and read aloud. The mirror has shown the truth. The truth no longer needs light to be seen. Soon it will reflect what she has become. Not what she fears, what she is. You were too late to stop the image. Now it must complete itself. I felt a chill run through me. Holmes stared at the words in silence, then folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket. Watson, he said, we must go to the gallery now. Something tells me the mirror has changed again. He looked over his shoulder, toward the hall, and this time, I fear the coffin may no longer be empty. Chapter 11. The name on the plate. Holmes led the way through the east corridor like a man walking straight into a storm. The rain outside had thickened, now lashing the windows in great diagonal streaks. Thunder rolled distantly, muffled by the thick stone walls of Blackamoor Hall. But inside, the air felt no less charged, electric, taut, waiting. We climbed the stairway to the gallery without speaking. The sconces had not been lit, and our footsteps echoed in the half-dark like ghosts chasing their own shadows. At the top of the landing, Holmes paused for only a moment. Then, without hesitation, he pushed the tall door open and stepped into the gallery. There it stood, the great mirror, silent and unmoved, framed in its curling Baroque silver, like a frozen portal to some other place, and there it was still, the coffin, now unmistakably different. I stepped beside Holmes and felt my stomach tighten. The coffin, once blank and closed, now bore an inscription upon its brass plate. A name, Lady Elise Chillingham. We stood frozen, both men of science, but neither immune to the chill that seeped into the spine when confronted by such a deliberate vision. Holmes, I said quietly, this is beyond illusion. Someone wanted this revealed, now wanted us to see it. Holmes's voice was low and hard. It's no longer about fear, it's about finality. This, he pointed, is the culmination, the signature, the moment the killer intended her fate to be sealed. He strode to the mirror and knelt before the base, examining the floor. The projection device is gone, entirely removed. This image, Watson, is not mechanical. I blinked. You mean? I mean it is painted behind the glass, layered beneath the silvering. A new mirror inserted to replace the original, crafted by hand. Crude, perhaps, but close enough to fool the eye, and now, it bears her name. I stared again at the coffin, the name so meticulously etched in gold against the cold brass. Elise Chillingham. How could they have installed it? I asked. Holmes stood. Last night, perhaps, during the storm. The house was restless, the staff distracted by Jeremy's recovery. The hidden passage, we know it leads here, and someone used it to swap the mirror completely. He turned to me with narrowed eyes. Watson, what do you recall about the bricked-up corridor? That it had been resealed years ago. Yes, but not sealed well enough. Someone had access perhaps for months. They prepared this entire deception behind our backs. There was a quiet footfall behind us. We turned. Lady Elise stood at the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her face pale, her eyes hollow with dread. She looked not at us, but directly into the mirror. Her mouth parted. It bears my name. Holmes stepped forward. Lady Elise, please, come away. But she did not move. It means I'm dead, or meant to be, or they want me to be. No, Holmes said gently. It means someone wants you to believe that, to surrender, but you must not. She shook her head. I've seen it before. In dreams. Not just the coffin but myself, inside it. And now it's here. Holmes looked to me sharply. Watson, take her from this room. She must not remain. I guided Lady Elise out with difficulty, her eyes still tethered to the mirror, as if under a spell. In the corridor, she finally spoke again. I can feel it, like the house itself is pressing me down. The walls, the glass, the eyes behind it. You're not alone, I told her quietly. Whatever you're feeling, Holmes is close to unraveling it. Is he? She whispered. Or is the mirror faster than he is? She allowed herself to be escorted to her chamber, and I returned swiftly to the gallery. Holmes was pacing before the mirror, arms folded, his expression stormier than the moor beyond. She is near the edge, Watson, he said darkly, exactly where they wanted her. One more turn of the screw, and she may be lost. Then we must act tonight, I said. Holmes nodded. No more analysis, no more caution. Tonight, we draw the spider from its web. How? He reached into his coat and drew forth the letter we had received, the one left at the gate with the chilling message. We bait the trap, he said. We answered this note. We respond not with suspicion, but with seeming despair. Let them think the illusion has worked, that Elise has broken, that the estate is unguarded, that now is the time to claim what's left. He opened a fresh sheet of parchment and began writing swiftly. The mirror has shown too much. Elise cannot bear it. She has withdrawn to her rooms, refusing food and speech. Leander will leave tomorrow to bring physicians. I remain alone, watching. There is nothing more to do but wait. J.H. Watson. He folded it, sealed it with Elise's crest, and rang for a footman. This must be delivered quietly to the gatepost, just as the last one was received. The footman nodded, though his face betrayed curiosity. Holmes dismissed him with a curt wave. Then he turned to me, eyes gleaming. We shall not sleep tonight, Watson. We will wait here, in silence, and whoever comes for the mirror will not find it unguarded. A gust of wind howled against the pane, and somewhere, behind the mirror, the coffin seemed to gleam with renewed menace, waiting, as always, for its occupant. Chapter 12. The visitor behind the glass. The hours that followed moved with the solemn, implacable weight of a funeral march. Holmes and I waited in the East Gallery, the fire long since reduced to embers. We had snuffed out the wall lamps and positioned ourselves behind the tall, velvet drapes at the windows, edged still and unseen, overlooking the mirror like hunters in a blind. Outside, the storm had lost its voice, but not its presence. Rain whispered against the leaded panes. The wind clawed at the shutters, testing their fastenings, and within the gallery, silence ruled. We had spoken little since dusk. Holmes remained crouched in the shadows, eyes fixed upon the mirror, every muscle taut. I, meanwhile, found myself watching not the hall, but the glass itself. The coffin still rested, there moved, gleaming faintly in the moonlight that filtered through the storm-washed clouds, and on its brass plate, the name remained. Lady Elise Chillingham. It was not just a visual trick now, it was a promise, a threat shaped like inevitability. Then sometime near the second hour, past midnight, sound, the faintest click. Holmes stiffened beside me. "The hidden panel," he whispered, "just beyond the west wall. They're here." We remained still as the air itself seemed to hold its breath. A shape emerged from the far end of the gallery, tall, hooded in a long overcoat, gloved hands holding something small and metallic. The figure moved slowly, with purpose, glancing behind only once before proceeding toward the mirror. I leaned forward. "Do you recognize them?" I whispered. Holmes's voice was barely audible. "Not yet. Wait." The intruder approached the mirror and knelt. With one hand, they reached toward the frame and removed something from within their coat, a slender tool, like a tuning fork crossed with a chisel. With it, they pressed against the lower edge of the mirror, probing for a catch. A faint click answered. The mirror shifted not much, but just enough to confirm what Holmes had long suspected. It was not fixed to the wall, but mounted like a hidden cabinet. And inside the cavity, the figure reached for something. Holmes stepped out from behind the curtain in a flash. "That will do, Mr. Chillingham," he said calmly. The figure froze. A pause followed, sharp as a gas band. Then, slowly, the hood was lowered. Benedict Chillingham. His face was pale in the moonlight. Not surprised, not angry, resigned. "You always were too clever, Holmes," he said, his voice soft, almost sad. I stepped forward, revolver in hand. "Stay exactly where you are." He obeyed, raising his hands slightly, the metal tool still glinting in his palm. Holmes nodded toward the mirror. "You planned for it to be found. That final name on the coffin, you painted it." Benedict's eyes flicked toward the glass, and a tired smile touched his lips. "It had to end somewhere, and names are how endings begin." Holmes moved toward the cavity, now fully exposed. Inside, we could see the truth, a narrow box, no more than 6 inches deep, with layers of painted plates stacked behind one another. Each could be shifted forward on a discrete track. Coffin lids with different features, brass plaques with different names, a mechanical illusion married to psychological sabotage, Holmes said. "Brilliant, in its cruel elegance. You make it sound like murder," Benedict said. Holmes turned. "Wasn't it?" Benedict hesitated. "No one died. Yet, but you were building toward it. Not a swift act of violence, but a slow corrosion. You orchestrated everything. The whispered dreams, the locket's disappearance, Jeremy's descent into madness. You pulled the strings from your cottage, always just beyond suspicion. And I did it," Benedict said, eyes flashing now, "because they forgot me. My father's birthright was stolen. I was buried alive in a house no longer mine. I gave Elise peace when she was broken, and what did she do? She let me rot in silence while they made a shrine of her frailty." "So you made her think the house itself had chosen her," I said. "She was chosen," Benedict replied, "by me. The mirror, her reflection, it gave her purpose again. Fear is more powerful than grief. She woke up because of it." Holmes's face hardened. "You would have driven her mad to prove she was alive." Benedict said nothing. From behind us, footsteps. Lady Elise entered the gallery, drawn by the light and the voices. Her eyes fell on Benedict, her cousin, kneeling by the mirror. She did not speak at first. Then she said, with remarkable calm, "I saw it change." He met her gaze without flinching. "It was always meant for you. You were the only one they'd believe. You, the quiet one, the fragile one. You wouldn't fight back." "I wasn't supposed to," she said softly. "Was I?" He bowed his head. Holmes approached her. "Lady Elise, the illusion is over. The mirror holds no power now. Not unless you let it." She looked into the glass once more. The image remained the coffin, the brass plate bearing her name. But in that moment, she turned away. "No," she said, "it does not." Holmes turned to Sir Leander, who had arrived just behind her, face white as chalk. "You'll see to it that Mr. Chillingham is turned over to the authorities." Leander nodded, wordless. Holmes moved to the mirror one last time. He reached inside the cavity and removed the nameplate, prying it loose with a swift twist of his fingers. Then he turned and handed it to Lady Elise, a souvenir, if you wish, or a warning, but no longer a prophecy. She took it slowly. And with that, Holmes turned from the glass. "Watson," he said, "there is nothing more to see." Chapter 13. The hollow between truths. The storm passed in the night. By morning, the rain had ceased, and a thin mist lingered over the moor, glowing faintly under a weak sun. Blackamoor Hall, for all its solemn bearing, seemed different in the lightless, like a prison, more like a monument weathered by time and secrets. And perhaps, for the first time in years, it stood without whispers in its walls. Holmes and I sat in the breakfast parlor, the remains of a modest meal before us. He stirred his tea with the distracted air of a man whose mind still moved many steps ahead of his words. "It is done," I said, though more as a question than a statement. Holmes raised an eyebrow, then set his spoon aside. "Almost," I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Benedict has confessed. The mechanism is dismantled, the illusion broken." Holmes leaned back in his chair. "Yes, but a curious inconsistency remains, Watson, one that has troubled me since our first night here." I sipped my tea cautiously. "And that is?" "Lady Elisa's visions," he said, "before the projection, before the nameplate appeared, before the locket was stolen, or Jeremy descended into madness." He tapped the side of his cup. "The mirror had not yet been altered, and yet she saw." "You think she was lying?" "No," Holmes said firmly. "I believe she was being manipulated earlier than we believed, long before the nameplate was painted or the mechanism inserted." He stood. "Come, I would like to visit the chapel again." We crossed the sodden grounds to the old stone chapel that had once served the Chillingham family for generations. It stood stooped beside the graveyard, its bell tower cracked, its door long since sealed. Yet now, Holmes held a ring of keys given to him by Sir Leander that morning. The iron door groaned as he opened it. Dust swirled in the air, and our footfalls stirred the silence of a forgotten sanctuary. Inside, it was dim. Stained glass windows, coated with grime, barely let in the grey morning light. The pews were warped, the altar faded, and at the far end of the nave stood a wooden door leading to a narrow vestry. Holmes crossed to the wall behind the altar. His eyes scanned the stone. He ran a hand along one panel, then stopped. "Help me," he said. "This is hollow." Together, we pressed against the old stone until it shifted with a dull scrape, revealing a shallow cavity perhaps 3 feet deep. Inside was a chair, and on the opposite wall of that cavity, embedded, like a lens in the stone, was a small, circular window, a pane of mirror glass, facing directly into the back of the great gallery mirror. I stared, stunned. "This was the original Sol Speculum," Holmes said quietly. "The original chamber. The mirror in the gallery was once part of this room, this secret cell behind the chapel. Someone could sit here and look through it, not into it." He stepped inside, examining the dust. "Recently disturbed," he murmured, "and there, see, scratches on the floor, just beneath the chair. Someone has been here, watching." "Watching whom?" "Elise, every time she passed the mirror, perhaps even when she slept." I swallowed. But this was sealed. Holmes, bricked for decades, or so we thought. He lifted a stone from the floor and turned it over. Fake mortar, hollowed brick. Someone reopened this months ago, cleared just enough to use it again, and then sealed it once more after they had the new projection installed, I concluded. Holmes nodded. "But the most unsettling implication is this: someone sat here, night after night, feeding Lady Elisa's dreams, not with images, but with presence. The sense of being watched, of being judged. The human brain does not need light to imagine horrors, only silence." He turned, eyes narrowing. "And I doubt Benedict ever knew about this chamber." "Then who?" I asked, before he could answer. A soft cough came from the nave behind us. We turned. Mrs. Greaves, the housekeeper, stood at the chapel threshold. Her posture was upright, her expression unreadable. "I wondered if you'd find it," she said. Holmes didn't move. "You reopened it." "I maintained it," she corrected. "My mother showed me the passage when I was a girl. She said it was where the original Lady Chillingham would sit when she wanted to reflect on her sins." Her voice was oddly calm. "I watched Elise because someone had to. She was slipping, sleepwalking, muttering, seeing things. I wanted to help. But when Benedict came to me, when he began to build his truth, I realized I could do more than watch. I could shape her path." "Why?" I asked. "Because she was weak," Mrs. Greaves snapped, "and the house needed strength. Benedict would never lead. He was a dreamer. But Elise, if broken properly, she could be controlled. And if not well, then she would be removed." Holmes stepped closer. "So it was you who placed the mirror plate? You who left the wax in the chapel yard? You who convinced Jeremy the mirror had meaning?" She smiled faintly. "He was already seeing ghosts. I only gave them names." Holmes said nothing more. He stepped past her without another word. We left her in the chapel, standing amid the dust and rotted pews, the faint morning light glinting off the cracked glass like the final shard of a broken confession. Back in the hall, Holmes and I stood in the gallery one final time. The mirror had been dismantled, its cavity empty. The illusion was gone, and in its absence, Blackamoor Hall felt still quiet, not with menace, but peace. Holmes turned to me. "There's a danger, Watson, in believing too deeply in symbols. They begin to behave like truths, and when truths are twisted, the mind follows." "And Elise?" I asked. "Will she recover?" He nodded. "Now that the glass is gone, I believe she'll see herself clearly again." I looked once more at the empty wall where the mirror had hung. Once it had shown a coffin, now it showed nothing, and somehow that was far more honest. Chapter 14. The glass remembers. For the next 2 days, a hush settled over Blackamoor Hall, not born of dread, but of something else, uncertainty. Perhaps the storm had broken, the illusion had fractured, and with it, so too had the tight weave of secrecy that had clung to the estate like ivy on stone. The gallery stood empty now. The mirror, once a vessel of terror, had been removed and crated away, awaiting examination by the yard. Lady Elise remained confined to her rooms, not out of fear, but exhaustion. Her strength had not failed. It had merely frayed at the edges from too many nights spent watching herself dissolve through silvered glass. Holmes had ordered no visitors. Let her rest without reflection, he had said with uncharacteristic softness. Yet, as the house began to breathe again, Holmes grew strangely restless. He spent his hours not in the drawing-room or study, but pacing the hallways, peering at cornices, muttering under his breath. He refused to leave, despite the case's apparent resolution. When I pressed him, he only replied, "There is something we've missed, Watson. Something that never passed through the mirror, but cast its shadow nonetheless." On the third morning, Holmes summoned me from the parlor with a quiet urgency. I found him standing in the east wing corridor, outside Lady Elise's chamber. "I had a question," he said, "and I now have an answer." He rapped gently on the door. Elise's voice, quiet but clear, called from within. Holmes stepped inside, and I followed. Lady Elise sat in a cushioned chair beside the window. Her complexion had improved, her eyes less shadowed, though they still held a wary shine. Holmes offered her a gentle bow. "My lady, I must ask you to cast your thoughts backward, before the mirror's descent began." She nodded slowly. "I've tried not to, but I remember. Do you recall, 1 month ago, did you receive any gifts, any packages, left anonymously?" Elise frowned. "Yes, now that you mention it, a small box. No note." "What was inside?" She stood, moved to her writing desk, and opened a narrow drawer. From it, she drew a velvet pouch, and from that, a flat silver disc no larger than a pocket watch. A locket, but unlike the missing heirloom Holmes had found in the chapel yard. This locket bore no miniature inside. Instead, its inner surface held a mirror, perfect oval, smooth, seamless. Holmes took it delicately and held it to the light. "This was the seed," he said, "not the great mirror in the gallery. This, the first reflection." I leaned forward. "But it's just a trinket." Holmes shook his head. "Not merely. Look at the curvature. It's convex. It distorts ever so slightly. The mind, when already fragile, begins to question what it sees. That, combined with subtle reinforcement whispers in the corridor, missing objects, altered mirrors, was enough to create a foundation of dread. Once established, the rest was simply a matter of reinforcement." Lady Elise stared at the locket as if it were a serpent curled in her palm. "Benedict didn't send this," Holmes said. "Nor did Jeremy. This came from someone else entirely, someone who understood optics." "Elise," I said gently, "do you recall the name of the Grimshope optician?" She blinked. "Yes, Mr. Halbert. He repaired my reading spectacles years ago." Holmes nodded slowly. "Halbert, of course." He strode to the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. "Halbert was hired by Benedict under the alias of Walker to build the projection lens. That much we assumed. But what we failed to ask was, why would a man of his expertise agree to assist in so elaborate a deception for so modest a fee?" He turned to us, eyes narrowed. "He didn't, not for money. He did it because he was already invested in the outcome. He was part of it from the beginning." A silence settled in the room. "You're saying," I murmured, "that Halbert orchestrated the first manipulation, that he seeded the locket, observed the responses, then offered himself to Benedict as a technician for the mirror, while quietly escalating the illusion all along?" Holmes nodded. "And more than that, he adjusted the mechanics to fail at precisely the right time. That is why Jeremy fell apart. That is why the image of the coffin persisted even after the lens was supposedly removed. Because Halbert had duplicated the effect elsewhere. He built redundancies not to help Benedict, but to control the entire illusion himself. Lady Elise whispered, "Then who was truly behind it all?" Holmes's expression darkened. "Someone who wished to see this house fall. Someone who likely viewed the Chillingham legacy with disdain. Perhaps someone whose family once served this estate, rather than inherited it." Realization struck me. "Mrs. Greaves." Holmes nodded grimly. "She admitted to maintaining the old mirror chamber, but she lied about how recently she discovered it. Halberd was her cousin born, Halberd Greaves. The family split decades ago. The house disgraced theirs. This was their revenge, a slow dismantling." By reflection, Elise murmured. Holmes knelt beside her. "You were never the weak one, Lady Elise, only the most sensitive. That made you the perfect lens." She said nothing, only reached again for the locket. This time, she did not recoil. "I want it melted," she said at last. "I don't want it hidden. I want it gone." That evening, Holmes and I visited the Grimshaw optical shop. Halberd, as expected, was gone. Disappeared overnight, his shop shuttered, his books burned in the hearth. Only an empty stool and a pair of cracked lenses remained behind. Holmes stood in the ashes, hands in his pockets. "The perfect crime," he murmured. "No blood spilled, no weapon drawn, just light, suggestion, and silence. And yet, it nearly killed her." We stepped out into the night, the fog returning like a familiar ghost. Behind us, Blackamoor Hall slept at last. And though its mirrors had been emptied, Holmes looked once over his shoulder and said, "Glass, Watson, remembers what eyes forget, but it cannot invent, only reflect." Then quietly, we turned our backs to the glass and left. Chapter 15. The second reflection. We returned to London in silence. The train hissed its way south across the damp moorlands. The sky overhead a bleached, endless grey. Holmes sat opposite me in the carriage, his gaze not on the landscape but somewhere far deeper, turned inward, as if the dust of Blackamoor Hall still clung to his thoughts. He had scarcely spoken since we left Grimshaw, and I knew better than to disturb the silence of his contemplation. Only when the train had passed into the green hills of Surrey did he finally stir. "There was a second mirror," he said suddenly. I blinked. "I beg your pardon." Holmes's eyes remained fixed on the window, though I now saw they were no longer looking through it. "At Blackamoor," he continued, "there was always a second mirror, the one no one spoke of, the one not gilded or framed or hung upon a wall." I waited, accustomed by now to his cryptic beginnings. He turned his attention to me. "We assumed the mirror was the cause, the vehicle through which the illusion spread. But in truth, Watson, it was only one half of the equation. The rest lived not in glass, but in the observer." I frowned. "You mean Lady Elise?" "More precisely," he said, "I mean the belief of Lady Elise. The mirror, with all its craft and cunning, could do nothing to a person who doubted its power. But she believed, and so, it became real first in her thoughts, then in her body, and nearly in her fate." I leaned forward. "But that was always their plan, was it not? To use her belief as a weapon?" Holmes nodded. "Yes, but what Halberd and Mrs. Greaves never accounted for was the echo." The second reflection. He drew from his pocket a folded paper, creased and stained. "You recall this? It was the anonymous letter we had received at Blackamoor Hall, the one that warned, soon it will reflect what she has become, not what she fears, what she is." Holmes unfolded it again, placing it on his knee. "There's something peculiar in the phrasing. It speaks not of the mirror, but of her. It suggests that Elise had already changed, that she had begun to become the very symbol designed to destroy her." "Are you saying she turned the illusion against itself?" "In a manner, yes. She began to expect the mirror to change, to speak, to respond. She looked for the signs, and once she did, it no longer needed to frighten her. It began to answer her instead." He tapped the paper lightly. "This was not written by Greaves or Halberd. It lacks their tone, their venom. This was written by someone else, someone who saw Elise's response and feared it." I narrowed my eyes. "Then who?" Holmes gave a faint smile. "Jeremy." I sat back. "Jeremy, the footman." Holmes nodded. He, too, was caught in the web. He, too, saw things, felt watched, believed. But when the illusion began to unravel, when Elise did not break, he realized something vital. That belief could also protect. He leaned forward. "Don't you see? He left that note as a warning, not to frighten Elise, but to warn us." The illusion had shifted. The mirror no longer held power. She did. That terrified him. But why not say it openly? Because he was still broken, Watson, still frightened. He could not face her, but he could leave a message. An anonymous confession, I exhaled. Then in the end, it was her strength that unraveled the entire plan. Yes, Holmes said. Elise did not simply resist the illusion, she transformed it. Where Greaves and Halberd used glass to wound, she used reflection to endure. The train slowed, the rooftops of London rising into view. Holmes folded the letter again and placed it gently back in his coat. I've often said, Watson, that observation is everything. But observation means nothing if it is blind to the heart. Lady Elise saw herself in the mirror not as a victim, but as a survivor, and that was the second reflection. Later that afternoon, we sat once more in our familiar sitting room at 2-1B Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson brought us tea, and Holmes, now restored to the rhythm of London life, lit his pipe and resumed his violin. Yet even the melody he played was subdued measure, as though Blackamoor's silence still sang faintly in his ears. I opened the day's post, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Finally, I asked Holmes what became of the mirror, the original one. Holmes lowered his violin. Scotland Yard retrieved it. They found no inscription, no image remaining, only glassplane cracked at the edge. It is locked in evidence storage, and the painted coffin, gone, scrubbed away, as if it had never existed. I nodded. And Mrs. Greaves, she will be tried for conspiracy and fraud. Halberd is still at large, but the web has collapsed. We sat in silence for a while. Then Holmes said, almost to himself, curious, isn't it? What is that for all the mirrors in that house, the clearest one was never made of glass. I looked to him. You mean Elise? He nodded. She saw herself when no one else would, and in the end, that was enough. I raised my cup. 2 reflections that speak truth. Holmes clinked his own gently against mine. 2 reflections, he said, and for a moment, the case of the coffin in the mirror was no longer a puzzle, but a parable one told not in shadows, but in the quiet courage of a woman who refused to be erased by illusion. Chapter 16. The Mirror That Watched back. It was a week after our return to London when the final piece of the mystery came to Holmes, not by deduction, but by post. A small, square parcel arrived at Baker Street. No return address, no stamp, simply placed upon our doorstep sometime in the early morning, as though slipped there by a shadow passing through fog. Mrs. Hudson brought it in with raised eyebrows, and I found it waiting on the breakfast table beside the kettle. Holmes eyed it with uncharacteristic stillness. Not from the Yard, he said quietly, and not from Elise. He unwrapped it carefully, peeling away the brown paper to reveal a flat black box of stained mahogany. When he opened the lid, we both leaned forward. Inside was a single object, a shard of mirror, glass about the length of a finger, its edges polished, its surface eerily flawless. And beneath it, a note written in crisp, deliberate script. We watched her until she stopped looking, and then we saw ourselves. You were never the one in danger, Mr. Holmes. The mirror was not for you. Holmes stared at the shard in silence for nearly a full minute. Then, very gently, he closed the box. Well, I said, that confirms it. He nodded. Halberd is still at large, still thinking in symbols, still playing with fear. And what does he mean we saw ourselves? Holmes's expression did not change, but a faint shadow moved behind his eyes. I suspect he's referring not to Elise, he said, but to the other conspirators. Mrs. Greaves, Benedict, perhaps even Jeremy. Each of them, in their own way, believed the mirror would deliver power, or peace, or validation, but what it ultimately showed them was truth, ugly, twisted, or fragile. He tapped the box gently. This shard, is not a threat, it's a message, a final salute from a man who believes himself an artist. I frowned. Shouldn't we turn it over to the Yard? In time, Holmes said. For now, I think it best we understand the meaning before we hand it away. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the morning sun creeping through the fog, to spill golden across the carpet. Holmes reached for his pipe, but didn't light it. Do you know, he said at last, what makes mirrors so unsettling? I glanced toward the shard. Their silence, he smiled faintly, that they offered truth without judgment. But if you stare long enough, the mind begins to fill that silence with interpretation. We project our fears, our hopes, our flaws until the mirror no longer shows what is, but what we believe. I leaned back in my chair, which is why Elise survived it. She stopped believing the mirror. Exactly, Holmes said. She saw herself clearly and chose not to fear what she saw. That is the most dangerous act a person can perform against deception. I looked toward the window. And Halbert, he will surface again, Holmes said, as all ghosts do. But I doubt he will haunt Blackamoor Hall again. His canvas is spent. That mirror was his masterpiece, meticulously crafted, painstakingly designed, and foiled. I nodded slowly. And Lady Elise, she has gone to Bath, to rest and recover. Leander wrote to say, she no longer speaks of reflections, she no longer flinches at her own shadow. That, I think, is the clearest sign of all, that the spell is broken. I stood and walked to the mantel, where the box now rested. The shard of mirror still lay within. Catching the morning light in its surface, I saw myself tired, steady, whole and for a moment, I thought I understood what Holmes had meant. The mirror had never been a thing of glass and silver. It had been an ideal one meant to hollow, to reflect only what others wished you to see, but for those strong enough to look past the illusion. The mirror gave back something else. Truth. Later that day, Holmes placed the shard in a velvet pouch and deposited it in the drawer where he kept his most enigmatic trophies: a bullet from a duel, a torn ribbon from a lost duchess, a coin etched with a cipher no man had ever solved. As he closed the drawer, he said, without looking at me, "Do you suppose, Watson, that mirrors can hold memory?" I raised an eyebrow. "You think they remember?" "No," he said, "but we do, and that is the greater danger. Not the mirror on the wall, but the one we carry in our minds, always reflecting what we think we deserve to see." He smiled slightly. "Elise no longer sees herself in a coffin. That is all the victory I require." He returned to his violin, and as the notes lifted once more into the air of Baker Street, I knew the case was truly closed. No villain left to pursue, no clue left unexplained, only the reflection of what had been, and the quiet strength of the one who refused to be defined by it. The end.